Well, Grand Admiral Pellaeon gets a lot of credit in Star Wars Legends for leading the détente between the New Republic and the Empire on the Imperial side. There are other examples of earlier cooperation between the New Republic and Imperials. The earliest came within days of Endor, when the Imperial garrison at Bakura, under Peter Thanos, accepted help from the Rebel Alliance when the planet fell under attack by the Siru V Imperium. But there's another Imperial character whose stories pretty much entirely revolve around cooperating with the New Republic, and who I think makes an interesting case study in some of the later defections from the Empire, and that is Teren Rogriss. Rogriss plays a key, if not large role, in two books in the X-Wing series, Solo Command and Starfighters of Adumar, both set after Endor. But while he doesn't make any other direct appearances in any media, including there being absolutely zero images of him anywhere, mentions in those books and in sourcebooks give us at least some information on his earlier career. We don't know exactly when he entered the military, but given his children were born about 5 and 10 years after the Clone Wars, it's possible he was part of the Republic military in the Clone Wars, or that he joined shortly after the formation of the Empire. When General Wedge Antilles and his team were going over New Republic intelligence about his Imperial service record 13 years after the Battle of Yavin, one of the words used to describe it was unambiguous. Rogriss was pretty exclusively placed in positions which brought him into direct conflict with the New Republic, or presumably the rebels earlier on. They did, however, also note that his career was free from a few of the bigger atrocities of the Empire. Nothing indicated his involvement with superweapons like the Death Star, the government of non-human populations, which tended to be the more oppressive Imperial occupations, and also nothing connecting him to Imperial intelligence projects, which also tended to be behind some of the Empire's most oppressive actions. This is extrapolated by Wikipedia into saying that he never took actions against civilians, but I don't think that's something you can extrapolate from what's being said. Rogriss is interesting though because he's often portrayed, at least within the fandom, as one of the good Imperials of the period. But I think he as a character is used as an example explicitly in the book of how people are able to rationalize their involvement or tacit support of the Empire or other similar regimes despite whatever code of honor they claim to live by, and how the limit of that is sometimes reached. After Endor, while many Imperials splintered off into their own independent warlord states, Rogriss remained loyal to Vizier Sate Pestage, the new ruling council, and the Imperial government on Coruscant. By the time Coruscant fell, the leadership of this branch of the Empire is a little less clear, remaining under at least some kind of continuation of the ruling council, with members like Ars Dangor, or potentially an earlier iteration of the Council of Moffs, which would soon emerge. But whatever group this was, Rogriss once again remained loyal to it. He saw some early successes against the New Republic, managing to defend Bilbringi against an attack by Admiral Namo, a Mon Calamari admiral in the New Republic Navy, in the lead up to the liberation of Coruscant. And in the wake of that event, we get the first actual story he's involved in, X-Wing Solo Command in the hunt for warlord Zsinj. As much as the Imperial warlords may have wanted to beat the New Republic, they also wanted to beat each other. In Solo Command, Han Solo is in command of a New Republic task force in charge of taking down warlord Zsinj, a campaign I've covered in more depth on its own in an animated breakdown. In this campaign, Rogriss surreptitiously offered aid to Han in tracking Zsinj, and even cooperated directly with Han's fleet in battles against the warlord, using the Interdictor Stellar Web to secretly help the New Republic. Rogriss and Solo also exchanged intelligence on the warlord. This was explicitly not the result of anti-imperial sentiment on Rogriss's part, or sympathy for the Republic. Rogriss had a reputation within the New Republic military, at least, as being someone who loved tactics and strategy for their own sake, and this was simply the most effective way to beat their mutual enemy. In his own words in Solo Command, quote, "Once we're done with Zsinj, we can go back to our very personal ideological differences, without having to invite anyone else to play," end quote. Rogriss was running the risk, should his cooperation be discovered, that he would be ostracized, executed, or worse as a collaborator, ending his ability to like this video and subscribe to Corey's datapad for more. So in his very limited words, we do know he has some ideological affinity for the Empire. While he may not have directly been involved with the Death Star, he was definitely not unaware of what the Empire was doing, but by being kept at least somewhat further back from some of the more obvious atrocities in his day-to-day routines, or even just some of the second-order effects of what he was doing, he was more able to rationalize a lot of it as being part of some greater good. But we'll get back to this particular viewpoint when we get to the starfighters of Adumar. Upon the successful defeat of Zsinj, the New Republic and Empire did in fact go back to playing, this time in the post-Zsinj campaigns, which I also have a more in-depth breakdown of. Suffice to say that these campaigns did not go particularly well for Rogriss. He suffered multiple defeats at the hands of Admiral Ackbar on the New Republic side, but others were actually still invited to play, as he was defeated by warlord Teren Rogriss of the Greater Maldruid at Frye Junction. The campaign resulted in some of Zsinj's former territory entering the hands of Rogriss's empire, but the vast majority went to the New Republic, which also claimed most of the Greater Maldruid's territory, despite Teradoc's victory over Rogriss. Rogriss returned to the Imperial government based on Orinda, but was soon after dispatched to command the defending forces at Kuat, leading the defense from a battlecruiser of unknown class, but which I usually go with as being a Praetor 2, the Aurora. So you can just substitute the Aurora as whatever battlecruiser type you like. This ended similarly badly for Rogriss, as he was defeated through computer hacking and financial chicanery, retreating to Orinda in disgrace. During the post-Zsinj campaigns, he was one of the Empire's highest-placed fleet commanders, but while he kept the rank of Admiral by the time of his second appearance in a novel, Starfighters of Adumar, his command was down to a single Star Destroyer, the Agonizer. Starfighters of Adumar takes place in 13 ABY, about 4.5 years after Rogriss's failure at Kuat, and for Rogriss's part, it mostly tells the story of his choice between his honor, the meaning of which gets explored for a lot of characters in the book, and what he's being asked to do. Adumar was essentially a lost colony, having fallen out of contact with the Old Republic and been recently rediscovered as mapping missions returned from the unknown regions. Adumar wanted to keep their options open and invited diplomatic parties from the Empire and New Republic. It was a culture which greatly respected fighter pilots, so Turfanier of the famous Imperial fighter unit, the 181st, was the Imperial representative, alongside Admiral Rogriss on the Agonizer, and Wedge Antilles, who had in practice moved way higher up on the command staff, was joined by some of his former Rogue Squadron ringmates as the New Republic's representative, escorted by the Star Destroyer Allegiance and its captain Salaban, who had previously been the captain of Battle Dog, a quasar carrier involved in the hunt for Zsinj. Rogriss soon came up against a dilemma, and this is where the more interesting parts of the character come in. He had guaranteed the Adumari that whichever choice they made, whether it was joining the New Republic or the Empire, it would be respected and he would leave. But he knew that if the Adumari didn't choose the Empire, he would be sent back and made to devastate the world. And this is where we get back to the idea that he hadn't really been forced to personally come face to face with the atrocities he's propagating. He may be aware of things like the Death Star and the destruction of Alderaan, but he's been able for a long time to rationalize that what he is doing isn't that. According to him, quote, "I've spent my whole life in honorable conflict. I've conquered worlds to bring civilization to them. Literacy and medicine and sanitation and discipline. I fought the forces of chaos to keep galactic civilization from flying apart," end quote. But leaving aside the connotations of what civilization and discipline might actually mean in the context of the Empire, it's probably not just as great as he may be thinking. The mention of honorable combat there is fairly important. To him, there's this idea that what he's done has been against fair targets in an open war, something that wouldn't be the case if Adumar chose to align with the New Republic and he was forced to attack them. Fundamentally, though, I think he's missing that this isn't substantially different from what he would have been doing under Palpatine when worlds decided to not be part of the Empire at that point. And if the same actions were being threatened to devastate Adumar, but he hadn't promised them that safety, I don't think he necessarily would have been as conflicted about what he was being asked to do. And I mentioned that section of Wikipedia earlier which claimed that he didn't take actions against civilians, and I think this is where we get to that not really jiving with what we know. His problem here isn't an objection to taking these actions against Adumar. There's no reason to think this is any different from what he'd have to do before to conquer civilizations in what he thought was a worthwhile trade for the gains he thought he was bringing to them, or at least to the rest of the galaxy. The big difference in the problem for him is that he's given his word that this isn't going to happen, and now the Empire is going to make him go against that. So in some ways he has this strong code of honor, but in a practical sense then, there's not the same care what impact his actions have. Wedge, in a conversation between the pair, where Wedge is talking him through parts of this dilemma, lays out a theory from Luke about how Palpatine was able to corrupt people who may have had some kind of internal code of honor like Rogriss's, as a way to explain the very edgy Imperial ship names, but which also could show how Rogriss could get to this way of thinking, saying, quote, "Put a man or woman in a situation where the actions they're obliged to take, such as serving Emperor Palpatine, are a certain path to personal corruption. Fill his ears with words saying that his actions are honorable ones, but surround him with constant reminders of the wrongness of what he's doing. Our victim will cling to the words, but will, at some level, always be aware of the wrongness. He can't escape it. The symbols, such as the names of the ships he commands, won't let him forget. He's always aware of this descent, of the slow transference to the dark side. Skywalker thinks the Emperor found this knowing acceptance of corruption, this half-accepting, half-struggling process particularly delicious." I also think alongside this, it's worth noting that Starfighters of Adumar doesn't hold honor as an unquestioned virtue either. In many parts of the plot, what characters define as their version of honor often leads them to pursue harmful actions. Adumar the planet loves duels and fighter pilots, so Wedge is regularly getting challenged to duels. Arriving on the planet, his Red Flight is attacked by 4 other Adumari fighters, assuming it's an assassination attempt, only to be told, quote, "They were probably young, undisciplined pilots trying to achieve some personal honor by killing you in a fair dogfight. I doubt it was anything personal," end quote. Wedge takes it very personally, and it opens his own dilemma about honor, and whether trying to get the planet to join the New Republic was actually even worth it, despite that being his duty as a member of the New Republic, having been sent there. Or if Adumar's inclusion would damage the New Republic that he'd worked so hard to build. He ultimately decides it's worthwhile, but there was a real moment of considering whether this was an area where his personal code of honor overrode his duty. In Rogriss's case, this is a much bigger struggle, and Rogriss even tells Wedge, "Where duty is clear, there is no question of honor." So that gets back to what Luke was suggesting earlier. There is this framework within Rogriss where he does try to hold himself up as honorable in whatever conception he has of that. And I think this gets to the core of what a lot of the discussion around quote-unquote honorable Imperials means. In-universe especially, they place a lot of value in the honor of serving in their positions, regardless of the ethical or moral implications of what they're doing. By diligently doing their jobs, they're upholding their own word, and thereby their honor. They try to separate themselves from what they see as the obvious excesses of the Empire, like the Death Star or whatever else, without really acknowledging that what they're doing is still part of this same system. And I think for Rogriss, that's why he gets so hung up specifically on the matter of his own word, rather than necessarily on the actions he's being asked to take. For Wedge in the same book, also explored through the idea of honor, this is the opposite. He does place a lot of value on his word, but generally his word comes after deciding what is the right thing to do. His word is backing up sincerely held convictions that he struggled to get to. It is not in and of itself where his honor comes from. You can argue that Wedge's solution to his honor dilemma was in fact just doing his duty as expressed by the New Republic, because he decides Adumar should join the New Republic, but we have other examples, like when he resigned to go after Isard when the New Republic didn't want him to show this wasn't just a default position for him. After decades of service, Rogriss was most directly coming up against the idea that the regime he was serving didn't have the same values that would lead him to make the promise that he did. And as Wedge points out in the Adumar Pilots Wanted web supplement, Rogriss had been working for the Empire so long he didn't realize he had a choice, too. Ultimately, Rogriss does reach a similar decision as Wedge. The situation on Adumar turned into a war between the Imperial-supported country Kartan and the Yedigan Confederacy in the rest of the world supported by the New Republic. This resulted in a victory for the Yedigan and the ruler of Kartan being replaced with a more pro-New Republic leader, so the writing was on the wall for Adumar and Rogriss needed to make his choice. If he made the call to the Empire, their forces would arrive and devastate Adumar before the New Republic could reinforce Wedge and the Allegiance, and he would break his word to the Adumari. He decided to lock out communications from the Agonizer, requiring a higher-ranking officer to override it, meaning the ship had to retreat and physically return to Imperial space to gather additional forces, buying Wedge the time to gather more New Republic forces for defense at the cost of his own Imperial career. Wedge offered Rogriss the opportunity to defect to the New Republic, which Rogriss rejected. He was still ideologically opposed to the New Republic, after all. Instead, he decided his time studying the defenses of Adumar and how to defeat them positioned him perfectly to accept a position as the defense minister and general under the newly united Adumari national governments. Despite being such a minor character in practice, even within Starfighters of Adumar, which is probably his bigger direct role, he only has like 2 scenes and in both of them he's very drunk, I think Rogriss is a pretty interesting character and gave a good opportunity, like Pelion does in a broader scope, to look at what reformation of some later Imperials might have taken, limited and slow as it might have been, along with giving us a chance to look at some of the forces pushing for or against that reformation. When characters are staying aligned with the Empire that late when the New Republic effectively controls the galaxy, there's clearly some problematic ideologies they have to be supporting, because clearly it's no longer the best opportunity to bring order to the galaxy. But when forced to directly put up their values, in this case Rogriss's value of his word, against the action the Empire was willing to take, something finally gave. That's going to do it for our look at Teren Rogriss. If you've enjoyed it, remember to leave a like and subscribe for more. Special thanks to the patrons who make these videos possible, and to MarMar for editing this video.